Well, good morning, folks, and welcome to our Interfaith Dialogue. It's a beautiful morning in Lakeside, and we're happy to see you here this morning. First of all, a few housekeeping things. These sessions are being recorded, so please check to make sure your cell phone is either off or in the vibrate position. And also, I want to remind you that there are forms on the back table. The sessions are being recorded, and as I said, and they'll be available if you want to re-listen to them or send them to somebody, as well as Reverend Lafferty's sermon from yesterday that will be available. And then if you've not received a Faith Walk devotional, those are available on the back table as well. I want to thank this week's sponsors of our dialogue and of our Pastor of the Week, Reverend Dr. Ned and Shirley Dwyer, who were my predecessors in this job. And between Lakeside and the Dwyers, they established an endowment that makes this possible, and we thank them. They were listening in yesterday, watching us on live stream, and I'm sure we'll be listening to these sessions as well. Now, there are a couple things that you received as you came in this morning. The first is a paper that is presented from Father Pfeiffer about interreligious dialogue, spiritual disciplines for ecumenism, and there you can see that there are 6 of them: prayer, love, honesty, forgiveness, patience, and conversion. Now, we usually in religious life, we don't have homework, but we have a homework assignment tonight, and that is to go home and read this document. It's very helpful, very informative, and kind of sets the stage for what we're trying to do. So if you would do your homework, it won't take you too long, and you'll find it insightful, and it's the kind of thing you're probably going to want to save because it's very helpful. The second thing is a 3x5 card, and if you have questions about interfaith dialogue and where we are in terms of Catholic and Protestant relations, and more specifically Catholic Methodist relations, you can write that down, and anytime during the time, and at some point later on, I'm going to ask if you have questions. You can hold up your cards, and we'll share these today and tomorrow. And if you think of something later on, you ask for another 3x5 card. You may have more than one question, of course. Now, we're very pleased to have with us Father Jim Pfeiffer and Reverend Matt Lafferty. To be honest with you, I didn't know that the the Methodist Church had a person in Rome doing what Matt's doing until Matt got there and started doing it. And we learned, because we're friends of Matt, we were following what he was doing. And so we said, what on earth is that over there? He is, as I announced yesterday, the director of the Methodist Ecumenical Office in Rome, responsible for the World Methodist Council's relationship with the Vatican and ecumenical partners in Rome. And when Barb and I went to Rome, we made connection with Matt, and we found his office and the church where he worships, and he took us, as I said yesterday, out to a wonderful Italian dinner, and we got to learn what his work involves over there. And then I wasn't just talking yesterday when I said that if you're a Facebook friend of Matt Lafferty, you will frequently see him with the Pope because they do have frequent conversations. And he told us too late that if we would have let him know sooner, we would have got an audience with the Pope while we were over there. But we'll do that the next time we're in Rome. Then Father Jim Pfeiffer needs no introduction to most of us, but what you may not know was he was the ecumenical officer for the Diocese of Toledo before he retired. And we know him more in his retirement role, helping us at Lakeside, leading the Roman Catholic Mass on Thursday evenings. But he, in the Toledo Diocese, served a number of parishes in the area as well as that role. So I want to begin this morning by asking each of these gentlemen to share what their role is. What in Father Jim's case, he said it's kind of like what his role was, but he's still doing it because we all know that he is very active and he's still doing his priestly duties. So we'll start with that. I do want to say, by way of introduction, that things have not always been the way they are today. As you know, when the Protestant and Catholic churches split, There was armed warfare that followed. Martin Luther was hidden in the Wartburg Castle so he wouldn't lose his life after he split from the Catholic Church. And some of us have seen where he stayed for protection. There is still conflict between Catholics and Protestants today. Here at Lakeside, I want to read, and this came from O.L. Shepard's The Story of Lakeside, 1923. In the year 1883-84, this is a history that was written, Miss Etta Johnson was postmistress, and Mr. John Johnson served from October 1884 to January 1886. About this time, the office was moved to the corner of Maple and 7th Street, where it straddled the fence in such a way that those who dwelt in utter darkness could get their mail without setting foot on holy ground. Did you get that? And those in outer darkness were those who were not Methodists.
That was the Catholics.
Those were the Catholics.
Yeah, loosely translated, the Catholics. So we have made a little progress in Lakeside since then, thankfully. And but of course, we're still not united the way many of us would like to be. So without further ado, let's see. Matt, why don't you tell us about your role, and then Father Pfeiffer. Will that be great? Good? Okay.
Sure. I can tell you a little bit about my role, and then Father Jim will tell you a little bit about the work he's done. But we also want to talk more broadly about what is ecumenism. This is a word that's been used today, yesterday. You may hear it in your life, in other places. What does it mean? And a bit of a history of the ecumenical movement, because that helps to situate some of the work that we have done. I, in September of 2020, began working as the director of the Methodist Ecumenical Office in Rome. It's a special office that was established in 2014 by the World Methodist Council. The World Methodist Council is an international federation, or what we in my profession would say is a Christian world communion. But it's an international federation of 82 Methodist denominations, which includes the United Methodist Church, the church that I belong to. And that work of the World Methodist Council began almost 150 years ago of bringing Methodists together. And from our experience working with the Vatican and the Roman Catholic Church since 1965, and the close relationships that our church leaders have established internationally, it led the World Methodist Council to say it is important for the work of unity to which God in Christ has called us to establish a permanent presence very close to the Vatican. Our office is 3 blocks from St. Peter's Square, so that our office can be a place to encourage dialogue and understanding between primarily Methodist and Catholics, but not only Methodist and Catholics, to seek opportunities for joint peace and justice between our churches, as well as being a place of hospitality to help welcome particularly Methodist and senior Methodist church leaders to Rome, and to help them understand that Rome is a city of both Peter and Paul, the apostles. Many of you may remember that Peter was martyred there, St. Peter's Basilica, the big church in the Vatican. But many of you have probably forgotten that the Apostle Paul was martyred in Rome. And so these are 2 heroes of the Christian faith that belong to all of us, whether you're Methodist or Catholic, and to help Methodists reclaim an identity that is reflected in Rome.
They belong to both of us.
They belong to both of us, yes.
Well, in some way, I'm Father Jim Pfeiffer. I was the ecumenical officer for the Diocese of Toledo for 10 years, from 2002 to 2012, and my involvement in ecumenism began long before that. I would have to say that as a child, I was always kind of fascinated by the fact that my grandmother's side of the family were not Roman Catholic. They were United Brethren. Remember the United Brethren? Yeah, and they as I say, they were not Catholic, but I knew they were very nice people. And so it always kind of spurred my interest in what makes them tick as well as what makes us tick. And so I was always interested in ecumenism, and after I was ordained, I had the good fortune to be invited at my first assignment, I guess, at Gallion, Ohio, to be invited to come to lunch every week with the Lutheran and the Methodist and the Presbyterian and the Episcopalian pastors. And of course, I just learned so much, and I was so pleased to be part of that group. And that was kind of the beginning of a lifelong interest, or you might say a lifelong adult interest in it. And so I was always involved in a lot of ecumenical work. And but as I say, in 2002, I was asked by the Bishop Huffman at the time, to be the ecumenical officer. And part of that included inviting Catholics to become more ecumenically minded. So I started an annual workshop gathering people from parishes, official representatives from each parish, and we would always discuss a certain topic that year. In addition, I was kind of the ambassador, the goodwill ambassador, I guess you'd say, for things. I would go to ordinations of some of the Protestant pastors that I was aware of, and a lot of things like that. And also during that time, I was able to implement opportunities for people to study some of the documents, because most people, I found then, were quite unaware of most of the good work that was being done on an international and a national level, and even a local level. So I would say that I worked more with the Lutherans than that, because they were producing a lot of those documents at the time. From Conflict to Communion, which I recommend to anybody to read, because it talks about the whole idea of the Reformation and the good that came out of it, and some of the bad that came out of it. You know, some of the necessary reforms that were done, that needed to be done in the medieval church, but also talks about the rupture that caused between Christians, which to this day is not completely healed. And so there was a lot of those things like that. And in the meantime, or as I retired, I continued my interest in it. And right now, I'm part of a group, but I'm a convener, I suppose you would say, of a group of Lutheran pastors and Catholic priests. We've been meeting for 27 years quarterly and discussing the things that unite us, the things that we still need to work on, and looking mostly at these major documents that have come out from the Lutheran Federation, and also from the Vatican. And a lot of times they're combined documents, and they give us a lot of hope. And as I say, I think the thing that my pressing concern now is, how do we get this out into the people? Because Bishop Farrell, who Matt knows, who is the former secretary, I guess, of the, call it the PCPCU.
They changed their name.
Yeah, I know. I love PCPCU better.
I know.
It's more fun to say, right? PCPCU, Pontifical Council for the Promotion of Christian Unity. Yeah, and I remember one time I led along with my Lutheran counterpart, we led a Lutheran Catholic pilgrimage to Germany and to Rome. And while we were there, we had a great meeting with him, and I remember him saying that all these documents, he said, they look wonderful sitting on the shelf. He said, but until they're read, until they got into the minds and the hearts of the people, they have little value. And he was absolutely right. So one of my driving forces these days is to get people to read some of this stuff, both national and international.
The ecumenical movement begins really in the late 19th century. But does anybody know what the word ecumenical or ecumenism means? What the original Greek word means? Does anybody know? I would be surprised if you did. It comes from an ancient Greek word, akuname, which means the whole inhabited household. And it became shorthand in the 19th century to talk about the universal church in its broadest sense. All of those who follow Jesus Christ, who may find themselves in so-called in communion with Rome,
Right.
And those who find themselves in other relationships, maybe through the theological inheritance of some of the great reformers of Luther or Calvin, or later of John Wesley. As Charlie mentioned in his introduction, I think probably many of us in the room who have a religious identity would either see ourselves as Catholic or Protestant. There's also an Orthodox identity, and we really don't have time to talk about that. But if you're interested in the questions, you can send a question through and we can talk about what that means. But we see in the 16th century primarily where there is a move for renewal within the one church at the time, and there's eventually separation between churches. We see this on the continent with the Reformation of Martin Luther and with John Calvin and Ulrich Zwingli and others from Switzerland, and we also see this movement in Great Britain in the English Reformation, which has a very different overlay, because it was also led to a civil war in a way that we didn't witness on the continent, but certainly there was lots of fighting, physical fighting and death between these various groups. And from that, they often disowned each other for hundreds of years. I'm a Methodist, so our unique contribution to Christianity begins in the 18th century. And John Wesley, who was our first leader, who's our theological hero, who came from the Anglican Church, was strongly anti-Catholic, which comes out of that tradition of Anglicans and Catholics fighting. And it was normative for Anglicans to be strongly anti-Catholic.
It was part of your national heritage.
Yes, exactly. And so we see these theological streams. But the 19th century brings a different reality for those of us living in Europe and in North America. Part of that deals with print media. Now we have ways of communicating with each other in a way that is fairly cheap. And we also have mass transportation. And so you can go from North America to Europe on a ship. It might take you a week, but you're not risking your life on some sailboat as some of our forebears did coming from Europe to North America. And so it leads churches to begin to have more interaction with each other. As I said, as a Methodist, 1881, the Methodists said, maybe we should develop a federation with one another so that we as Methodists can begin talking with one another. And this idea begins to take hold, and you find that Methodists, Lutherans, Presbyterians, Anglicans begin talking with each other at a very high level. And part of the concern of the church at the time is, how do we share the gospel of Jesus Christ with the world? How do we go out in mission into the world? And what you may not always remember is a lot of the mission activity of the church, the growth of the church in the global south, originates in the 19th and early 20th century mission activity. And so the Protestant churches came together, and what we talk about is probably gives birth to the modern ecumenical movement in 1910 at the Edinburgh Mission Conference, where representatives of various Protestant churches came together to say, we believe that God in Christ calls us out into the world to share God's saving love with the world and to invite others into salvation in Christ.
And I might say that the problem was, as these different missionary groups that go out, the Presbyterians, the Lutherans, the Methodists, and all those people, they go to these missionary sites, and the reaction of many of those people that they were going to was, well, Catholics were here last week, you're here this week, and you're all saying different things, about what's true and what isn't. And the idea was, get your act together and then come and see us. Right. And I think that was a spur to making that happen.
Exactly. The division that we experienced in Europe and North America were not the same divisions that needed to be exported to other parts of the world.
Exactly.
And we also have to admit that this mission conference was really a colonial project as well, because they pulled out a map and began to say, you Methodists, you go to this part of the world, and Presbyterians, no, that's not your part of the world, but you can go to this part of the world to mission. You Lutherans, okay, you can go here. Anglicans, okay, maybe you go here, and we'll cut this country in 5 different places. So you Methodists can go to the southeast, and you Anglicans can go to the north. And but it gave birth to this understanding that as Christians, maybe we should begin to recognize and cooperate in a very broad way. And from that then led 2 different movements. And so part of what Father Jim was talking about in terms of documents, you're probably saying, what are you talking about, documents, was a movement of what we call faith and order. And from that, and from the First World War, right, there's a sense that we can't allow the division that has plagued our societies that led us to war should continue. And churches said, we haven't generally been killing each other, but we've been divided for such a long time. Maybe we need to find ways of interacting with each other and begin talking with one another and understanding each other. And so it led to 2 broad movements. One was what we call faith and order, which was trying to figure out the theology that divides us.
Yes.
And how do we begin to talk with one another and sort out, in a very untechnical way, sort out those issues so that we might find new consensus, common agreement.
And one of the interesting things I always thought of, that World War I had a lot to do with the beginnings of the ecumenical movement, and it happened in kind of an unusual way, because here were guys who were Lutherans and Methodists and Catholics and Baptists and everything else, all in the same foxhole, and when you're getting shot at, you really don't care who's protecting you, do you? It doesn't become an issue. And so I think some of that first ecumenical dialogue, if you want to call it, started in a rather unusual place in the foxholes.
Right. And the second strand of this movement, beginning in the early 20th century, was what we called life and work. So it wasn't about Christians trying to sort out the theological issues. It was trying to say that as the church, we are confronted, whether you're Methodist or Catholic, Lutheran, Greek Orthodox, in our societies we're confronted with the same issues. And particularly in a place like the U.S., where all these churches might be next door to each other, our communities have the same problem. We all are confronting the same issues. And so how can we have a shared witness to the social and ethical concerns that are happening in our society? Eventually, those movements, which created all kinds of organizations, merge in 1948 to establish what we now know as the World Council of Churches, which is a fellowship of Christian churches, 356 of those churches who span almost all of Christianity, except probably the one biggest church, well, certainly it is the largest church, who is not a member, and that's the Catholic Church. And maybe that's a good segue for you to talk a little bit.
Good segue.
Because there's also a lot of things happening, not only between Protestants and Orthodox, but Catholics are sorting some things out among themselves too.
Yeah, and to back up a little bit, you have to realize that many of the people who adhered to the Catholic faith were people who came from Europe, Italians, Irish, Polish, many of those people. And when they got here, they were not particularly welcomed. Remember the signs, no Irish need apply, and that were in some of the factories and so on. And so they were not welcomed, and so the Catholic people adopted, I would call, something of a defensive stance necessarily. And so since they weren't appreciated, I would say, by the general population. Remember, it was a Protestant country, we pretty much said as Americans. And, the WASP, White Anglo-Saxon Protestant, yeah. And so the Catholics kind of, in order to protect their community, their faith, became people who formed their own communities. And so that's why you see the strong parishes with a strong pastor. And the whole attitude was we have to prevent losing our people because, well, for one thing, at the public schools, it's well known that the Protestant preachers were coming in and trying to convert all those little kids into little Protestants, you see. And so that's actually the origin of the Catholic school system in the United States. It was in order to give those kids a chance to grow up as Catholics and not be swayed by their indoctrination, weak thought of Protestantism. And so that's what happened. And that was pretty much the stance of the Catholic Church, I would say, until the Second Vatican Council. Shortly after a round roly-poly man became the Pope, Pope John the 23rd, he said, we need to open the windows of the church and let some fresh air in. And so he surprised everybody. He was quite an old man when he was elected. Everybody said, well, we don't know who we want for the next Pope. The cardinals didn't know who they wanted. And so what did they do? Well, we'll pick an old guy. He won't be around very long. Well, what a mistake. Because the first thing he did was call a synod for the priests and everybody of Rome. And then he said, we're going to have an ecumenical council. And we hadn't had one of those since 1870. It was only going to be the 21st, I think, ecumenical council, which is a meeting of all the Catholic bishops of the world. And so
it's important to point out that in this sense, ecumenical only meant Catholic.
Ecumenical.
The ecumenical
not
council
Catholic.
called
I'm sorry.
by John the 23rd.
Thank you. Yes, I need to clarify that. Thank you.
Because there were no other Christians outside of the Catholic Church.
You're damn right.
At the time.
So anyway, he called these 2,600 bishops together. Ecumenical councils, I say, they were major councils of the church. That's what they were called. And they met from 1962 to 1965. One of the first things they did was take a good look at the way we prayed, at the liturgy. So the document on the liturgy was the first one issued. And one of the 18 documents that came out of that 3-year meeting was the one on ecumenism. And it just opened things up, that we need to be working for unity. Why? Because Jesus wanted that. Remember John 17:21, that all may be one, that the world may believe. Huh?
There was a great sermon yesterday on that passage, by the way.
There was a what?
There was a great sermon yesterday. In
Oh, I heard it.
Hoover Auditorium.
I can only agree. When do I get to preach on Sunday over here? I get Thursday night. But anyway, that's pretty much the way it happened. And in the meantime, many people responded to that document and said, yes, let's try to work together. And so there was a lot of reaching out, and a lot of local groups forming. Say, let's get acquainted. Let's work together. And not only let's work together, let's talk about greater unity, because we do see that this disunity harms the evangelical effort of the church, the reaching out to others who are not committed fully to Christ. And so that's kind of what happened. And that continues to this day. The fact that the Lutheran and Catholic dialogues especially have moved far on this. We have a document that was issued a few years ago jointly called From Conflict to Communion. And it talks about the whole origins of the Reformation, the background, and so on and so forth, and really sheds a lot of light and enlightens a lot of people on the real causes of the Reformation and the positive things that came out of it. Because we see the Reformation as doing two things. It had a very positive effect in the sense that it brought about some needed reforms in the church, and the negative effect was it shattered the unity of the church, which we think as Catholics is very, very important, see? Not uniformity, but unity. And we sort of adhere to that that saying, some people say St. Augustine said it, some people say, no, John Wesley first said it, and it's attributed to a number of people. See, it goes, in essentials, unity. In non-essentials, liberty. And in all things, charity. And I think that's what we try to work at. There have been a number of these documents since, and in our own diocese, most of these have been studied by different groups of people. In fact, there's been a group in Marblehead that after the official time for looking at from conflict to communion, this document, have continued for several years. I'm very fortunate in fact that, as I say, we have about 15 Lutheran and Catholic pastors. We've been meeting now for about almost 30 years and looking at all of these things. And I find that's the thing that really has to happen because there's so many misunderstandings that are gradually being knocked down, and that's important.
Father Pepper, would it be fair to say that there's more dialogue between Lutherans and Catholics than the other Protestant denominations?
Yes, I would say so.
And if so, why would you say that is?
I say that is because actually when you think about it, who was Martin Luther? He was a priest, right? And that was that first split. And so when he was separated from the Roman Catholic Church, many of the practices and beliefs, obviously, of the medieval church, went with him, and we share them. And so even though we have had some major differences, there are a lot of things that unite us. There's kind of almost like a brotherly relationship that happens that is not so true of the other denominations. I would say that we've capitalized on that too, because we find that they have a strong desire, I'm finding, for a uniting in many cases.
The Lutheran.
Yes, the Lutherans do, yes, yes. Matter of fact, I was at a picnic the other night, and one of them said, we were talking about the Pope, and he said, we need a leader who can speak for all Christendom. And of course, that's what the Pope is more and more doing. I think it's interesting, too, that in many ways, I think the two things that have divided Catholicism and Protestantism has been the whole issue of the papacy, and of course the whole idea of the Eucharist, and so on. But that idea of the papacy has always been a stumbling block. Pope John Paul II wrote a huge letter to the whole church called Ut Unum Sint, which means that all may be one. And he said, I realize that the papacy, as it's presently exercised, is and can be a great obstacle to developing greater Christian unity, greater unity among all the followers of Christ. And he said, I'm calling upon others, non-Catholics, to help us in this. And so that was 30 years ago. And 30 years later, just this past June, there was a document called, it's called a study document, that issued by the Christian Unity Office of the Catholic Church in Rome, saying that the Pope says it's time that we really, really look at this. And the discussions of the last 30 years have resulted in many greater understandings of what the papacy ought to be about. And so he's saying what some Catholics are saying, whoa, that we need to maybe take another look at that 1870 document about the papacy. Maybe we need to use different language about it. We need to rethink it, because all of these things that happen, these decisions and so on, all have a historical context. And that historical context changes from time to time. So we need to look at it, what were things like back in 1870 when that decree on infallibility was issued, and to what extent was that couched in all kinds of historical and political circumstances, and how should we look at that again? I think it's in here that he said we need to think of the papacy, sometimes Pope's at the top, you got the bishops, then you got the priests, then you got the people on the bottom of the pyramid. And the idea is it's time to turn that pyramid upside down, because the Pope is, and ought to be, as we're more and more seeing this, he is to be the minister of unity, of keeping unity, developing unity in the whole Christian church. Now, many people are starting to say, yeah, that makes sense. So we'll see.
Okay, Matt, I'm going to ask you to respond to that. The issues that Father Pfeiffer raised, the issue of the papacy, and of course in 1870, the idea that the Pope is infallible is kind of distasteful to Protestants, to say the least. We have trouble with that idea. And also the fact of the Eucharist, how if we go to, as Protestants, go to Mass, we're not really supposed to take communion. So can you respond to that, and Matt, and give your perspective? Would you say, first of all, would you say those are the big two issues dividing us at this point? The papacy and the Eucharist.
What?
Go ahead.
Oh gosh.
Maybe that's being overly simplistic.
Well, to give some context to what I'm going to say, is that one of the radical things of the Second Vatican Council, this Catholic meeting of bishops, is that Pope John the 23rd said, maybe we should have representatives from other Christian churches be a part of our proceedings. And so it was at the invitation of John the 23rd that Methodists and Anglicans and Lutherans and Presbyterians and lots of Orthodox were invited into the proceedings of that work. And the decree on ecumenism that comes from it helps shift the Catholic Church into a new orientation towards other Christian communities, other Christian churches, from one of saying that salvation is only found in the Catholic Church, which is essentially the kind of pre-Vatican position, to saying that it is in the Church Universal, which includes other Christians, even though we are not able to share fully in every aspect of Christian faith together yet.
But still the Holy Spirit works within those groups.
Exactly.
The Vatican document says.
Right. And so what led from that was a number of high-level what we say dialogues between these world bodies to begin to sort out our theological issues. There was in 1967 established the Methodist Roman Catholic International Commission, which is a dialogue committee of Methodists and Catholics appointed by our two respective churches, who have been working continuously since 1967 to try to sort out, try to discern, listen to the Holy Spirit, and say, these are the issues where we thought we were divided, but we realized that the language that we used was different. And so on the face of it, it appears that we don't agree, but when we sit and talk about the theological ideas that are underneath those words, we find that we have convergence. And then there are times where we said we thought we were talking about the same thing and realized we actually weren't. And we need more time to discern together a path forward. And then there are issues that I think this is where your question was going to. What are the issues that we still find fundamental disagreement? And on one level, one answer would be we don't find fundamental disagreement on many, if any, issues. And you might say, well, wait a minute, what about Eucharist? What about Mary? What about the Bishop of Rome? But when you look at what's happened from 1967 to 2024, we've made a tremendous amount of progress. So when we talk about Eucharist, for example, Methodists hold a position of real presence. Methodists would say that while that Christ is physically present in the bread and the juice, or the bread and wine of the sacrament, this is our official teaching of our church. How that happens and the mystery that happens within that, Catholics would have historically articulated a clear understanding that Methodists say we can't quite get there yet. But what we've been able to do in our dialogue is say, in our understanding of communion, we've gone from saying we don't agree to now saying we agree on 80 or 85% of what communion, Holy Communion, or Eucharist would mean.
And there's a great document attesting to that.
That's right.
Yeah.
And maybe what we need more time is to talk about the metaphysics, which is of it. Because for us as Methodists, this is not a theological framework we often work in. And so it begins to appear that we don't agree.
See, Trent used the Aristotelian categories, and that's where that word transubstantiation comes up. I think that we have to keep that in mind. There again, that's a historical context for these things.
And it's a word that we don't use anymore in our dialogue. Catholics don't use it anymore. They are using more and more the term real presence.
Right.
And we're saying, well, we use real presence too, this term. So that's led to more work.
And the Lutherans too.
Exactly. And then so Mary would be an obvious one. And how do we, as humans, relate to the saints? And often for Protestants, we've said we only pray to Jesus, or we pray to God through Christ. This idolatrous stuff you do with your statues and those beads, and what's going on? But
shame on us, huh?
But a theology of who Mary is a place where Methodists have learned from Catholics to understand that there is a particular devotional practice of praying to God through the saints.
Through the saints, not to the saints.
To the saints, that we as Methodists are still quite nervous about.
You're getting used to it, though.
Yeah. But part of what Catholics have helped Methodists understand is that the role that Mary has played in the apostolic or the early faith of the church, that the first apostle for Catholics would be Mary, the first disciple, the first one who recognizes the ministry of Jesus Christ was his mother. And there's something profound that, because we say, well, Mary appears a few places, but she's gone. But to say, actually, here's the person who recognizes his ministry, the one who is chosen by God, and to help us reclaim some of that understanding that we've lost because we always want to think that we're in opposition.
Yeah, right. We're saying, if Jesus loved Mary so much, why don't you?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Yeah. But there's still aspects. And
there again is historical, cultural context of all that. We German types. My ancestors are Luxembourgers. And generally, I say the Germans and so on. We tend to be everything religion has to be from the eyebrows up, right? What do you think about things? Whereas much of the Catholic world, I think of like the Italians and the others, they're very much more, they express themselves emotionally. And so, sometimes I would go to Cary, Ohio, which is a big shrine of Mary, Our Lady of Consolation. And they have this parade, out to the shrine park to have Eucharist. And in the meantime, they got this statue of Mary, and all the ladies are following along, And the funniest part I ever saw was they have these hat pins with $10 bills on them, and they stick them right into the float, And what they're doing is they're making an offering. But I mean, we Germans would never do that. We just wouldn't do that. But I mean, a lot of it is conditioned by the cultures of the communities from which many people come. And that's what a lot of Protestant people see, and they assume, they must be adoring the Blessed Virgin or something. No, as I say, we don't pray to any saints. We use that term a lot, but what we mean is we're asking for the prayers of the saint to God, to Christ. So we really are doing that. But as I say, that is based upon a lively sense of the communion of saints, that once a person dies, that's not the end of them. I think we believe in eternal life, right? And so we believe that these people are in glory and are in union with God, and therefore we we covet their prayers. That's what it comes down to.
And we would find some other issues like the episcopacy, bishops. Now, what's interesting in our work, and not only our dialogue work with Catholics, but with other churches, is that Methodists among ourselves, we don't agree on bishops. In the United States, Methodists have bishops. Most of the world have bishops, but the Methodist Church in Britain, the mother church of Methodism, as my church describes them, has refused to have bishops. And they said, we had one bishop named John Wesley, and he was an absolute tyrant. And so we don't want one. We don't want one person who's in charge. But instead, they've adopted a model, a presbyteral model, a presbytery, a model that you might see in Presbyterian churches where the decisions are taken collectively, and you would elect a person who convenes that group, but doesn't have the authority that in British Methodism is the president of the conference, because Methodists love conferences. We don't use the word diocese or synods. We use the word conference, and they elect a president of the conference who is there to help moderate and convene and to carry out the decisions, and in an emergency take a decision on behalf of the conference until they can meet to make a decision, which is a different understanding than what bishops in the United Methodist Church, bishops in the African Methodist Episcopal Church, and other Methodist churches in the United States would have. And so here's an issue that we struggle with Rome on and continue to reflect on. What is episcopacy and what does that mean? And we've been able to recover common ground because part of what it means to be bishop is to give oversight to the church. But where we still differ is that some Methodists say that oversight is given to a person, a bishop, and others, like British Methodists, would say that is given to a group of people who exercise the same ministry as a bishop, but do it collectively as a group of people. And so there's work that still is being done among Methodists, but that work also then is done in conversation with other churches, including the Catholic Church.
And a good friend of mine is Bishop Marcus Lorman. He was the bishop of the Northwest Ohio Synod of the Lutheran Church for 18 years. And we always talked about bishops and so on. And like he said, we see, as Lutheran, we see ordination as a ordination to a ministry, whereas Catholics see ordination of a bishop as an ordination to a state of life. Mm-hmm. And so when a bishop retires in the Catholic Church, he's still a bishop. And he can do all kinds of bishop things.
Same in Methodist.
What's that?
Same in United Methodist.
Yes. And among the Lutherans, Marcus, even though we always call him Bishop Marcus, Bishop Lorman, and that's kind of a common thing for them, still, he says, no, I'm not a bishop anymore. I'm a pastor now. And so it's a ministry of service rather than a state of being.
I was going to say, one thing we all have in common is church politics, right?
No.
Little joke there. Anyway, I want to shift gears a bit, but I also want, if you have questions written down, if you'd raise your hands, Kayla and Dan Moulton will come by and collect them. And we'll have more time for questions tomorrow. But I want to ask Matt, every day in the life of a pastor is different, but in terms of like the scope of your work, how would you describe what you're doing in Rome? In a little more concrete terms, in terms like, do you have office hours? How much time do you spend at meetings representing the church here and there? Just in a general for us. I realize, no 2 weeks are the same, but
really no two weeks are the same. But part of my work is representational. Part of it is really working like a church ambassador to be in as many places as possible to share Methodist perspectives on what's happening. So in the last, I've just finished writing the annual report. In the last 12 months, I've done 100 public engagements. This is going everything from conferences to seminars, symposiums, to receptions, cultural events, a number of these kinds of things. So I have a particular ministry of eating and drinking fermented grape juice. That's
What's
part
that
of
called?
Well, he is in Rome. I mean, yeah.
When in Rome, yeah.
So that's one aspect. One is we encourage Methodists to come, and we work with Methodist pilgrim groups to come.
Okay.
So our office personally organizes high-level visits. So we had a group of 10 American Methodist bishops who came a few months ago, and we planned a pilgrimage and ecumenical encounter for them. So that's one aspect. Our office staffs this Methodist Roman Catholic International Commission. We're meeting in 3 weeks in Korea, and we're working on the theme of mission and unity. And so we've been working to articulate clearly Catholic and Methodist understandings of unity. How do we share unity among Methodists? How do Catholics share it among themselves? Part of that has been pushing the Catholics to say, you talk about a particular teaching, and yet there is other theological and liturgical traditions of the Catholic Church, the so-called Eastern Rite churches, who bring perspectives that are important. But when we talk about the Catholic understanding of Eucharist, the Eastern Rite churches leave a lot of mystery that the so-called Latin Rite don't.
Like things laid down nice and straight.
So this is part of the work that we're doing. We're meeting, I said, in 3 weeks. So part of that, I've been doing writing on this. What is the idea of Methodist unity? And I'm particularly interested in the legal frameworks of this, and how do we organize ourselves in polity or church order for these questions. So I've been writing on that, but also preparing logistical things. In October, Pope Francis is convening another 4-week meeting of the Synod of Bishops. The Methodist, my colleague, the former president of our World Methodist Council, is our fraternal ecumenical delegate to the meeting. So part of that work now is preparing him so that he understands what's going on, but we're preparing a number of side events that are happening there. So I don't know if that gives a good snapshot of what's going on.
And then I just wanted to ask, what's it like to be in a room or have an audience with the Pope? Specifically with Pope Francis.
Yeah, Pope Francis seeks ecumenical relationships. He's particularly interested in ecumenical relationships that bear fruit in a common witness of the church in the world. So that's a nice way of saying he's really interested in how can church leaders have a common witness on care of creation. So one of the big initiatives in Pope Francis' movement has been on care of creation, and he's had 2 encyclicals, 2 pastoral statements on this, and so he's very eager to engage with church leaders. He's very kind, and he likes to joke around, and so he always has a bit of levity in his conversations. I was with him. The vice president of our World Methodist Council had a brief audience with him at the end of May, and she's from Ireland, a woman named Gillian Kingston, and Pope Francis spent half the time telling jokes about Irish and Italians. Pope Francis, who's Argentinian, but whose family is Italian immigrants, and so wanted to tell all the jokes he knew about Italians and Irish. And then there are times that where he also is very free to speak his mind. And one of those was when our International Theological Commission met with him a year and a half ago. We had a 30-minute meeting with him where he likes to start with jokes. So the first question was, when will theologians from all the churches agree? And we said, we don't know. He said the day after the final judgment. And I thought, having been in many of these encounters before, I thought, we're in big trouble here, because he in his own thinking, while he appreciates this theological work that's going on, theologians are paid to care about small nuance that may or may not be significant in the life of the church. And so he sees some of this work as not really advancing the cause of Christian unity in a way that is important in the 21st century. So he gave us a light smack, I think.
He cuts to the chase.
Yes, in that.
Yeah. Well, we want to open up the floor for questions tomorrow, but these questions that you've written will give us an idea of what you're thinking as we prepare for tomorrow. Why don't we try this one on the top? Matt, how is your literal proximity to the Catholic Church, your Catholic spirituality, deepen your own spirituality? Let me reread that. How is your literal proximity to Catholic spirituality deepen your own spirituality? And I would just say, while you're thinking about that just being in Rome and being in the Vatican and being in St. Peter's Basilica was a spiritual experience for Barbara and me. And so you're there all the time. We were just there for a couple days. So
I think the first thing to point out, I did not go to Rome to become Catholic. I'm very much a Methodist. I have not felt more Methodist in my life, except in Rome.
I'll pray for you.
The work of Christian unity is not converting each other.
No,
we are already converted to Christ. We share a common baptism in Christ. This is the starting point. And so it's important that I give this disclaimer before anything that follows, because I think that may not be the intent of the question, but I don't want you to hear it in a frame that makes you think that I'm somehow, as we would say, cross the Tiber, which was the euphemism of converting to being Catholic. And I also will point out there's a different spirituality in St. Peter's Basilica than there is in the rest of Rome, in part because when you're around the Pope, everything is very grand. Yeah. Everything is very grand, and I think sometimes even for Catholics, particularly those who come from more simpler places, can be disoriented and overwhelming in those settings. But I think in terms of Catholic spirituality, the intentionality, particularly of course with my colleagues who are Catholic priests, about celebrating Mass every day. I'm not celebrating a Methodist service every day, but rooting one's life in a sacramental practice of communion. I think Eucharist has been something that's been impactful for my own spirituality, as well as drawing upon liturgical traditions that unite people around the world, or unite Catholics. I think is one of the things that has been influential in my own thinking and spirituality in the last couple of years.
Thank you. Well, in conclusion today, I'd like to suggest that in some small way, we at Lakeside are hopefully part of the ecumenical movement of people working together. And when you described your church in Moscow with people from all different denominations, we had yesterday at Hoover and here this morning people from all different denominations. When I go to Mass, I see my friends, and I use that term totally. They are my friends. There I see people here and there and everywhere, and all of us working together. And I'd like to think that we're kind of boots on the ground doing some of this work here that is being done at more high levels. And sometimes I think in the local level we've got it figured out more than we do at the.
Exactly. We can talk about that tomorrow. I think there's.
Okay, go ahead.
I think there's something profound that those of us who work at this very high level also need to be attentive to, as those who aren't working at the high levels need to be attentive to. I think that's part of what you brought out in the earlier statements, and maybe we can explore a bit more of that tomorrow.
Okay. Well, thank you, folks, for being here. I appreciate this so much. Don't forget your homework for tomorrow, and bring your questions or have them written down. We'll open it up with microphones as well. So thank you all, and have a great day at Lakeside. Don't forget, we're back tomorrow at 9 o'clock, and then tomorrow evening, Vespers on the lake, our last Vespers for the season, and our last Mass that doesn't sound quite right. The last supper. The last mass for the season at the train station will be Thursday evening with Father Piper. Thank you all. Oh yeah. Yeah, so we can use those again tomorrow.